$42,500. I stared at the total on my banking screen, while another alert flashed beneath it. Luxury hotel, Rome. Designer boutique, Paris. Private tour, Barcelona. Then my phone rang. Dad. I answered without speaking. His laughter exploded through the speaker. Well, Hannah, he said, looks like you finally did something useful for your brother. Behind him, glasses clinked. My mother laughed, and Kyle shouted that they were about to order another bottle of champagne. My grip tightened around the phone. What did you do? We found your debit card, Dad said proudly. And we used your money. Consider it payback for being so selfish. The account held the final payment for the commercial building I had spent years preparing to buy. My parents knew that. They knew every overtime shift, every canceled trip, and every sacrifice had gone into that balance. Yet Dad sounded happier than I had heard him in years. You work all the time and act like you're better than everyone, he continued. Kyle deserved this vacation. Family should share. Another alert appeared. $3,800. Dad laughed again. That one might be dinner. I looked across the conference room at the woman sitting opposite me. She was watching the call timer, her laptop open beside a growing file of transaction records. Remember this call, I said quietly. You'll wish you hadn't done it. Dad snorted. Still trying to scare people. Goodbye, Hannah. He disconnected, while everyone around him was still laughing. For several seconds, the room went silent. Then I placed the phone on the table and forwarded the recording. The woman across from me pressed a key and listened to the final seconds. That admission helps, she said. I stared at the frozen account total on my screen. 2 days earlier, I had noticed my card missing after a barbecue at my parents' house. At first, I thought it had slipped beneath a seat or fallen from my purse. Then the foreign charges began. I had not called Dad. I had not warned Kyle. And I had not frozen the card. Instead, I had contacted my bank's internal fraud division and walked into this room carrying everything I knew. The investigator's screen suddenly chimed. She opened a travel notification, then turned the laptop toward me. My parents, Kyle, and his wife had just boarded their flight home. She closed the evidence folder. Now, she said, we have everything we needed. The debit card disappeared 2 days before my father called from Europe. I noticed it after the barbecue at my parents' house. I had stayed behind to help Mom clear the patio while Kyle and his wife talked about the trip they claimed they could not afford. You could help them, Dad said as he carried an empty tray into the kitchen. I already said no. He stopped beside my purse on the counter. You have more money than you need. That money is committed. To what? Another project nobody in this family understands. I looked at him. The office building, you know that. He rolled his eyes and moved past me. Later that night, I opened my wallet at a gas station and found the card slot empty. I searched my car, called the restaurant where I had stopped earlier, and checked every room in my apartment. By morning, I was ready to report it lost. Then the first foreign charge appeared. A business-class airline upgrade. 20 minutes later, there was a hotel deposit in Rome. I stared at the screen until Dad's words from the barbecue came back to me. You have more money than you need. I did not call him. I contacted the fraud response team at work. The investigator assigned to the case studied the transaction history and asked, who knew the account balance? My parents. Who had access to your purse? My father. She leaned back. We can freeze it now, but that may leave us with a stolen card dispute and very little proof of intent. You're telling me to let them keep spending. I'm telling you that if these are people who believe they are entitled to your money, they may give us evidence we cannot get later. I hated the idea. Every purchase threatened the building I had spent years saving for. Still, I agreed. That evening, the family group chat lit up with photos from Italy. Kyle stood beside a rented sports car. Mom held shopping bags. Dad raised a glass toward the camera. Underneath, he had written, "Thanks for making Kyle's dream come true." The family group chat did exactly what my father expected. Heart emojis filled the screen. "Amazing trip. You two finally deserve this." So happy Hannah stepped up. I read every message without replying. Then my Aunt Linda wrote, "Hannah, this is the nicest thing you've ever done for Kyle." Before I could type a single word, Dad answered for me. She finally realized family comes first. More relatives joined in. One cousin joked that maybe I wasn't as selfish as everyone thought. Another asked why I hadn't posted any vacation photos if I was paying for everything. I locked my phone and set it beside the growing investigation file. Across the table, the fraud investigator adjusted another document. "They're becoming very comfortable," she said. "What does that change?" "It changes everything." She pointed to a list of overseas transactions. Several luxury purchases had triggered additional bank verification procedures. Each time, someone claiming to be Hannah Brooks had answered security questions and approved the transactions. "They're impersonating you now," she said. Recorded. Every authorization call. She opened another folder. Hotel check-in copies. Passport scans. Merchant receipts. Digital signatures. Airport surveillance stills. Every expensive purchase connected to one of 4 people. The evidence was becoming impossible to dispute. 3 days after they returned home, my parents hosted a family dinner to show everyone souvenirs from Europe. The dining room buzzed with excitement. Kyle passed around photos, while Mom displayed designer handbags across the table. Dad raised his glass. "I'd like everyone to thank Hannah," he announced loudly. The room turned toward me. She finally contributed something meaningful to this family. Applause broke out. Someone smiled at me. "It's about time." Another relative laughed. "You should pay for the next vacation, too." I stood slowly. No anger. No argument. No explanation. I simply looked around the room. "So, everyone here believes I willingly paid for all of this." Heads nodded around the table. Every single one. I smiled. "Good." Before anyone could ask what I meant, the front door opened. 2 unfamiliar people stepped inside. One of them looked directly at my father. "Richard Brooks." "Yes. We need to speak with you regarding an international financial fraud investigation." The room fell completely silent. No one moved. My father still held his wine glass halfway to his mouth. He forced a laugh. "There must be some mistake." The taller investigator stepped forward and displayed his identification. "We're investigating unauthorized international debit card transactions totaling approximately $42,500. Dad looked around the room as though someone else would answer for him. Then he pointed at me. "My daughter paid for the trip." The investigator turned toward him calmly. "Do you have written authorization from Hannah Brooks allowing you to use her debit card?" Dad opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Mom quickly stepped in. She knew we had it. The investigator nodded once. "Can you provide any text message, email, signed document, or recorded consent confirming that?" Silence spread across the dining room. Kyle finally spoke. "I thought Mom and Dad paid for everything." The second investigator opened a folder. "Our evidence indicates otherwise." He placed several photographs on the dining table. Security images from luxury boutiques. Hotel registration, records linked to passport numbers. Copies of signed receipts. Airline purchase confirmations. Then he placed printed transcripts beside them. "These are recordings of authorization calls made to the bank while someone impersonated Hannah Brooks." Every relative leaned forward. The investigator continued. The caller answered security questions using Hannah's personal information while identifying themselves as the account holder. Dad's face drained of color. Mom whispered, "Richard." He ignored her and looked at me. "Hannah, tell them this is a misunderstanding." I met his eyes for the first time that evening. "I reported my missing debit card 2 days before your phone call." The room erupted. "You what?" Kyle shouted. Dad stared at me in disbelief. "You reported us." "I reported a stolen card." The investigator closed the folder. From that point forward, this became an active fraud investigation. Dad took a desperate step toward me. "You can stop this." The investigator answered before I could. "No, she can't." He looked directly at my father. "The matter now involves alleged identity fraud, unauthorized international transactions, and recorded impersonation of an account holder. This investigation proceeds regardless of whether your daughter wishes to participate." No one defended my parents now. The relatives who had applauded only minutes earlier stood frozen, staring at the evidence covering the dining table. As investigators began documenting additional items and requesting financial records, I quietly picked up the folder resting beside my chair. Inside was the paperwork for the commercial office building I had believed was slipping away. I walked toward the front door without looking back. Behind me, I heard my father call my name. For the first time in my life. I kept walking. The truth came out over the following weeks, and it was even worse than anyone in my family had imagined. The morning after I discovered my debit card was missing, I filed an internal fraud report through my bank's emergency response process. Because I worked as a senior cybersecurity fraud analyst, I knew better than to contact the suspected users first. The investigators immediately noticed something unusual. This wasn't a random stolen card being used at convenience stores or gas stations. It was being used by people traveling under their real names. Luxury hotels required identification. Airlines required passports. High-end retailers recorded signatures. Large international purchases triggered identity verification calls. The lead investigator explained it to me in simple terms. If we freeze the card immediately, we stop the spending. If we document the entire pattern, we prove intent. That distinction mattered. Anyone could claim a single purchase was an accident. $42,500 spread across multiple countries, combined with recorded impersonation, forged approvals, and dozens of deliberate transactions, painted a completely different picture. So I waited. Not because I enjoyed watching my savings disappear. Not because I wanted revenge. Because every hour they kept pretending they owned my money, they strengthened the case against themselves. The recorded phone call from my father became one of the investigation's strongest pieces of evidence. He had laughed. He had admitted they found my debit card. He had proudly declared they spent my money because I owed the family. He had even described it as payback for being selfish. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding, no accidental use, only a confession. When the forensic accounting was finished, investigators had assembled a timeline that matched every movement of the trip. Airport security footage showed my parents carrying my debit card. Hotel registration records matched the dates of the unauthorized transactions. Luxury stores produced signed receipts. The bank produced recordings of every authorization call in which my father falsely claimed to be me. Even my mother's shopping purchases matched surveillance footage from the boutiques. The evidence fit together so completely that their attorney advised them to stop making public statements almost immediately. Criminal charges followed. My parents were charged with multiple financial offenses related to unauthorized use of my debit card, identity fraud, and fraudulent authorization of financial transactions. Kyle was not charged criminally. However, the civil investigation concluded that he knowingly benefited from stolen funds after learning where the money came from. He became jointly responsible for repaying a significant portion of the financial losses. The luxury vacation he thought had been a gift became the most expensive trip of his life. The family group chat went silent. Then, one by one, relatives started calling. Aunt Linda cried, "I believed your father. I'm so sorry." One cousin admitted he had repeated the story that I finally decided to support Kyle. Another confessed that everyone had always accepted my father's version of events because he spoke with so much confidence. For years, I had been labeled the selfish daughter. Now everyone understood why I had stopped saying yes to every demand. Several relatives tried convincing me to forgive my parents. "They're still your family." I answered every person exactly the same way. They stopped acting like family before they stole from me. Because the fraud had been reported immediately and handled through established banking procedures, eligible losses were restored under the bank's protections. Additional recovered assets and court-ordered restitution covered the remaining financial damage. The commercial building purchase went through. The day I received the keys, I stood alone inside the empty lobby. Dust floated through the afternoon sunlight. Concrete floors echoed beneath my footsteps. Most people would have seen an unfinished building. I saw every late night. Every weekend I worked instead of taking vacations. Every promotion I accepted. Every sacrifice my parents had mocked. Months later, the renovation was complete. The glass doors carried the name of my cybersecurity consulting firm, exactly as I had imagined years earlier. Clients began arriving. Employees filled the offices. For the first time in my life, I built something that no one could take away by making me feel guilty. I never reconciled with my parents. When they sent messages asking for another chance, I didn't respond. There was nothing left to explain. One afternoon, a reporter covering financial fraud asked whether I regretted reporting my own parents. I smiled. I didn't report my parents. I reported a stolen debit card. Everything that happened after that came from choices they made themselves. Months later, I drove past my office after a long meeting. The company sign reflected the evening sun. I remembered the sound of my father's laughter during that phone call. Back then, it felt like the moment everything I had worked for was disappearing. Now I understood it differently. That laugh wasn't the sound of someone who had won. It was the sound of someone so convinced he would never face consequences that he confessed before anyone even had to ask. My father told me to consider it payback for being selfish. In the end, the only debt that remained was the one they owed to the truth.